Hi everyone, today we have several fourth-year medical students here to share their favorite pediatrics resources, the schedule they used to study for their rotations, and just general tips so you can do well on your third-year clinical clerkships. What study resources do you recommend for this rotation?
BRS Pediatrics was something that a lot of people said was necessary to read, and I don't agree with that actually. I think the best thing to do for peds is UWorld, the NBMEs, and just pay attention in clinic. You see so many of the common things in clinic. You'll see 30 patients a day in most clinics, and that'll be all you need to study for a lot of the NBME test.
Peds was really tough for me, and I still don't know why. I think it's just because there's lots of rashes in micro, and so if you weren't strong on micro before, it might be good to maybe refresh with a sketchy or two. Probably not necessary, but just if it's been a little while since you looked at it, I remember micro was a big part of my shelf. Again, did UWorld. I did online med ed for peds. Tried to read some of the first aid. I didn't think first aid was super helpful for peds, but it's there. And then I did case files. But yeah, peds was tough, especially I was in an outpatient setting, and so I didn't see a lot of kids who were really, really sick. And so everything I was learning was from the resources. And I think it's a lot better if you can get to a place where you're really seeing these pathologies to help it stick.
It's the same thing. I used case files and pretests, which was pretty good for peds. In addition to that, UWorld has their pediatric section, which I think that is the thing that helped me the most for shelf, just because a lot of those questions are pretty similar to what I saw on the shelf. But I didn't do too much reading outside of that, just because peds was one of my last clerkships, so I'd seen a lot of it in bits and pieces, like in surgery, there was some peds. In emergency medicine, which I had before that, there were some peds. So I just found watching online med ed and doing practice questions helped the most.
My preceptor had a book called, I think it was Case Files, which is a popular series of books that he and she, there are two of them, let me borrow. So I took it home and I was able to study it in there. And then same Peds UWorld, I used UWorld a lot. The Peds questions are also really hard. For our school, you do only outpatient Peds, which is so different from what you're tested on. So doing practice questions again was hugely, hugely important because I knew a ton about vaccine schedules and things like that from being in the clinic, but I didn't know anything about pretty much any illness other than a runny nose or asthma. So I had to do a lot of work with practice questions to see what they wanted me to know. And then even I used my old step 1 first aid a few times to look up some of the genetic diseases and just brush myself up on it because I hadn't thought about them in months.
Definitely do online med ed in the car like I usually do. I always start with UWorld. You got to do all of your UWorld. That's the gold standard. Do all the NBMEs that they have available. I think there's 2 or 3. And then I also listen to Emma Holliday. So she has these 4 YouTube videos. They're each 2 hours long. I think she has internal medicine, surgery, psych, and pediatrics. And peds is a big, big block. There's a lot of material in peds. There's a lot to know. So she does a really good job of, in 2 hours, kind of succinctly covering all of the really important stuff and even some of the kind of lower yield but do frequently show up. So it was definitely a good use of my time to go through that and really pick apart her slides and try and get as much as I could out of that.
For practicing questions, I'd recommend UWorld as well as pretest. I felt like pretest for pediatrics was actually one of the best. This is something I do for all of my rotations. I finish UWorld, I do a first pass, and then I use some other resource to do some questions. So for pediatrics, I used pretest, did all 500 questions, and then I went back to UWorld and did all of my incorrects for peds. And I felt like that was very solid. It really prepared me well for the shelf exam. In addition, I used clerkships as well as visitor's deck for pediatrics.
How did you schedule your studying for this rotation?
Peds was a much more relaxed rotation. It was very strict, 9 to 5 with an hour in the middle for lunch. I was able to do all the UWorld questions. I was able to read a lot of BRS Peds, and I was able to do the NBME tests. Just broke it up and made sure that I got able to do a fixed amount every single day.
So I was in an outpatient office and there was a lot of downtime, which was good for studying, but didn't make for the most exciting rotation. And so I just studied in the office, in the back room, between patients and on my lunch breaks. And usually by the end of the day, I had done 40 UWorld questions. And so I didn't really have to study too much outside of my actual rotating hours. And that's probably how I had enough time to do case files too. Was just after work one day, if I got home at a decent hour doing a couple cases, I somehow got through everything.
Peds is one of the more relaxed. I mean, most of the rotations are going to be busier than you were in the first 2 years, but it's one of the more relaxed schedules where you didn't have to come as early or stay as late. So I found there was more time to kind of get my studying in and get back to my hobbies and stuff too.
I studied a lot during clinic. There's a lot of downtime during clinic where people either wouldn't show up or I feel like particularly in Peds clinic, they were all like bunched together and it was kind of like an accordion. Either everybody was there or nobody was really there. So I was able to study a lot in clinic. And then because it's all clinic hours, like I was able to go home at like 5:30 every day. And that was a little bit more consistent and it's easier to go home and study then.
Peds, I was a little more fortunate. So Peds, I think, in general, is a little bit easier in terms of the actual amount of time that you're there for your rotation. I usually would get out 3 to 4, so I had a little more time in the afternoon, and it was close. I mean, I was only driving about 15 minutes to get to the office I was working at. So come home, I'd have a little bit more time than most of the other rotations. I could get through some more UWorld than I typically would be able to on other ones. So I was kind of lucky in that regard.
I was outpatient for my entire pediatrics rotation, so I felt like scheduling study time was very much doable. I woke up every morning and did a set of like 15, 20 questions. And then after my rotation, I'd finish grading all of my questions. I also studied a lot on the weekends. It's one of the rotations that was right in between of two of my more difficult inpatient rotations. So I also took a day off over the weekend and just kind of spent it just hanging out without babies.
What general tips would you recommend to do well on this rotation?
No Spanish. I got kicked out of so many rooms because I did not know Spanish in Peds. Be empathetic, really work with the kids and the patient and the parents. I think for me, the most difficult part was talking to the parents, and the kids were easy to handle in comparison. Know your common things. Know the common viral exanthems that you're going to see. Know which vaccinations and when to give them, and be able to explain vaccinations to people. I've had a lot of my most difficult patients were ones where you had to work on explaining the vaccinations to the patients and to their parents. And finally, I would say be really good at the discussion of talking to a parent and the child about being overweight and what kind of lifestyle changes they need to make and what kind of diet changes they need to make. I would say that was my second most common visit, was spending 10 to 20 minutes with a patient talking to them about what can they do to change their body habits, what can they do to change their diet habits, and what can they do to like feel better about themselves. And a lot of these kids want to be better. And I think that was a point where medical students can have a really large role, is that conversation.
So Peds is interesting because the patient, and like everybody says this, but the patient isn't really always the one that you're interacting with the most. It's often the parents. And so trying to empathize with the parents of kids who are often, in my case anyway, an outpatient. A lot of these kids were fine. The parents are worried. But, still treating it as if like that was your kid and you were worried about them is important. And then reading up on the vaccination schedules, that was all over my shelf, and I wish I'd paid a little bit more attention. It's so boring, but just knowing it will be helpful. The milestones, knowing all the milestones and applying those to each patient you see will really help sear them into your memory. I probably couldn't tell you right now like how old someone has to be to draw a triangle, but on my Peds rotation I could have. And then understanding that, not to take it personally if the patient isn't responding to you or is crying at you or won't let you look in their ears. Kids can just be tough sometimes. Learning fun tricks to get them to like you, having a couple stickers in your pocket or a lollipop or something that can distract the kid while you do other things. I'll get you bonus points.
You're going to have to learn how to basically examine kids. Most of the kids aren't going to be happy to see you. They're going to be crying. They don't like coming to the doctor. So maybe have something in your pocket or learn about some video games that you can talk about with kids and make them feel more comfortable.
Wash your hands. Everyone I know, including me, got really sick during Peds. And you can't really study when you're sick. So make sure that you're washing your hands. Wear a mask if you feel at all sick or if a kid's like coughing directly into your face, which happens a lot. Again, do as many practice questions. The NBMEs are really important for psych because that's how you know what they're going to test you on and not just like what you're seeing.
Peds is a lot of fun. I mean, hanging out with kids is cool. It kind of keeps things low stress. Usually they're not too sick as long as, if it's outpatient versus inpatient. Keeping those particular, especially like rashes and things like that or various conditions that kids come in with, if you can really try to remember that patient and what that looked like, it really helps you when it comes test time because, there's so many different types of rashes and, sore throats and things like that. So if you can try to remember what it was actually like when you were examining that patient. I think it'll help you.
I'd recommend just honing in on your interpersonal skills and talking to parents skills. This is something that was commented on in my feedback in a good way, that my attending liked that how I spoke to the parents as well as the child, and kind of gave them both their autonomy. If it was a 14-year-old, I spoke to the 14-year-old with respect in addition to the parent. So I think it's a really great rotation. You get to be around like adorable babies and also just hone in on your interpersonal skills.